London, 1925. The empire still looks immortal. The statues are polished, the Royal Navy patrols the seas, and the pound sterling is listed on every exchange board as the king of global trade. But 3,000 miles away, in the quiet, smoke-filled backrooms of New York, the ledger books told a different story. The bankers there knew what the public wouldn't accept for another 20 years. The pound had clinically died 5 years earlier. The crown had already passed. The world just hadn't received the memo yet. We are obsessed with the crash. We look at the charts and ask, when will it fall? That is the wrong question. The terrifying reality isn't the collapse itself. It is the delay. The real question you should be asking is, why does a financial system that has lost its core function continue to operate for half a century longer? And more importantly, are you currently betting your life on a timeline that actually ended years ago? You believe you are chasing money? You aren't. What you are actually chasing is the absence of a terrifying friction that civilization has spent 5,000 years trying to bury. Strip away the digital numbers in your bank account, remove the paper bills from your wallet, and you don't just lose wealth. You lose the ability to function. You enter a logistical nightmare that economists politely call the double coincidence of wants, but which feels more like paralysis. Imagine for a moment that the dollar disappears tomorrow. You are no longer an investor or a professional. You are a hunter of coincidences. Let's say you are an architect. You have drawn the perfect blueprints for a skyscraper. You are also starving. You go to the baker. He has the bread you need to survive, but he has absolutely no use for a blueprint of a 40-story building. He needs a new pair of shoes. Now, your hunger is irrelevant. To eat, you must leave the bakery and hunt for a cobbler. But you have to hope that this specific cobbler happens to need a skyscraper at this exact moment. If he doesn't, you keep walking. This is the search cost. In a world without a dominant currency, you spend your life searching, not producing. The probability of trade happening falls to near zero, because the math works against you. You are trapped in a loop of inefficiency where your skills are worthless unless you find that one specific person who wants exactly what you have. This is why money exists. It was not invented to be a store of value. And it certainly wasn't invented to make you rich. It was created to kill the search cost. It is the social lubricant that stops the engine of humanity from seizing up. When you hold a dollar, or a euro, or a pound, you aren't holding value in the physical sense. You are holding a universal exemption slip. It is a document that says to the baker, I have already contributed something of value to society, so you don't need to check my resume. Just give me the bread. And here lies the dry irony of our modern financial religion. We have built massive cathedrals of finance, Wall Street, the City of London, central banks, and we worship the currency as if it were the god of prosperity. But in reality, money is just a claim check. It is a logistical patch for a problem we solved thousands of years ago. We are so terrified of the friction returning, so terrified of that silence where trade stops, that we will accept almost any flaw in the medium as long as it works. This is the first uncomfortable secret of why dying currencies survive long past their expiration date. We don't cling to the dollar because we trust the politicians in Washington. We don't use it because we believe the Federal Reserve has our best interests at heart. We use it because the alternative is the chaos of the search. The fear of hyperinflation is terrible. Yes, but the fear of barter, of that absolute liquidity freeze where your labor cannot be converted into food, is primal. We chose efficiency over sovereignty. We accepted a system where a third party gets to print the tickets, simply because we didn't want to walk the streets looking for a cobbler. We bought convenience, but the invoice for that convenience is invisible, and it is billed in a currency you cannot print. Your autonomy. The more expert you become in your field, the more vulnerable you are to the system. There is a dangerous myth we tell ourselves, that becoming a specialist, a master of your craft, makes you independent. The opposite is true. The deeper you specialize, the tighter the handcuffs lock around your wrists. Consider the mechanics of the trap. In 1776, Adam Smith famously wrote that the division of labor is limited by the extent of the market. He sold this as the path to the wealth of nations. He forgot to mention it was also a one-way street into total dependency. In a primitive economy, you might grow potatoes. Everyone eats potatoes. Your product has high acceptability. You are poor, but you are robust. If the currency collapses, you can still trade a sack of potatoes for a pair of boots, but you wanted more. You wanted efficiency. So you specialized. Today you might be a senior back-end engineer, a corporate attorney, or a brand strategist. You are incredibly productive. You generate massive value in the abstract. But ask yourself a brutal question. How many people in your neighborhood actually need a brand strategy at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday? As your productivity skyrockets, the number of people who can directly trade with you crashes to near zero. You have traded survival skills for market value. You cannot trade your Python code for antibiotics. You cannot trade your legal advice for a gallon of gasoline. This is the specialization trap. You don't just want the dollar, you are structurally addicted to it. You need the medium of exchange to bridge the massive gap between your highly specific output and your basic biological needs. Without the currency, your six-figure skill set becomes theoretically valuable, but practically worthless. We wear suits and call this professional leverage. We talk about financial independence. But look at the forensic reality. We have built a civilization where the most successful people are also the most helpless. We have constructed a voluntary internment camp where we are fed and clothed only as long as the payment network remains online. If the ledger stops, the potato farmer survives. The hedge fund manager starves. This explains the inertia. This is why dominant currencies don't just vanish when the government debases them, or when inflation eats away your savings. We don't revolt because we can't. The cost of exiting the dollar system isn't just a portfolio loss. It is an existential crisis for your career. We are hostages to our own competence. We are stuck in the room, and once a population is trapped by their own specialization, unable to walk away, the entity holding the keys to the currency can start doing things that defy all logic. They can rewrite the laws of physics. They can borrow without paying back. To understand how that kind of power is built, we have to look at the first prototype. It wasn't built in Washington. It was built in a small, unassuming house on a canal in Amsterdam. Long before the Federal Reserve, and centuries before the marble columns of Wall Street rose to intimidate the sky, the blueprint for global financial control was written here. It is a mistake to think that exorbitant privilege, the ability of a nation to borrow for free, is an American invention. It is not. It is a Dutch invention. And it didn't start with a government. It started with a private partnership called Hope and Company. Picture Europe in the 1770s. It is a continent on fire. Kings are debasing their coins to fund endless wars. Banks in Paris and London are collapsing. In this ocean of chaos there was one rock, the Dutch guilder. And the gatekeepers of that rock were the bankers at Hope and Company. They engineered a mechanism that defied the basic laws of economics. In a normal market, if you want to borrow money, you must pay interest. If you want people to deposit money with you, you must pay them for the privilege. Hope and Company reversed the polarity. They didn't pay interest on deposits. They offered zero interest. Sometimes they even charged a fee, and yet the money poured in. Kings, aristocrats and merchants from France, Spain, and Russia lined up to hand over their gold. Why? Because they weren't looking for profit. They were looking for a safe haven. They were terrified of their own governments, so they essentially paid the Dutch to protect them from their own volatility. This created a financial anomaly that changed history. The Netherlands, a small nation with a stagnant economy and a fading military, suddenly found itself sitting on a mountain of free capital. They could borrow from the rest of the world at interest rates that were half of what the British or French had to pay. This is the true definition of financial hegemony. It isn't about having the biggest army. It is about becoming the vault of the world. When you are the vault, your enemies send you their wealth for safekeeping. You take that capital, which costs you nothing, and you lend it out to allies, or use it to finance your own debt. You are effectively funded by the very people you are competing against. The dry irony here is sharp enough to cut glass. True power is not holding a knife to someone's throat and demanding their wallet. True power is structuring the system so that they voluntarily bring you their wallet. Thank you for holding it. And sleep better at night knowing you have it, even while you use their money to solidify your position above them. But history has a way of balancing the ledger. The Dutch thought this privilege was eternal. It wasn't. It lasted only as long as the perception of safety lasted. When Napoleon's armies finally marched into Amsterdam, the illusion shattered. The capital fled as quickly as it had arrived, and the Dutch financial system collapsed. The guilder died, but the model did not die. The blueprint for exorbitant privilege was too valuable to be forgotten. It simply packed its bags and crossed the channel. It moved to London, and there it prepared for its next evolution. A trick far more sophisticated than anything the Dutch had ever attempted. Because while the Dutch relied on safety, the next empire would rely on something far more insidious, the invisible handoff. We are taught a comfortable lie about how empires end. The history books tell us that the British pound passed the torch to the US dollar in 1945 after the smoke of World War II had cleared, in a polite geopolitical ceremony called Bretton Woods. The data says the history books are lying. If you ignore the political speeches and dig into the dusty archives of the bond markets, the actual legal IOUs of the world, you find a very different crime scene. The murder didn't happen in 1945, the pound was already clinically dead by the mid-1920s. New forensic analysis of international bond issuance shows that the US dollar had already overtaken the sterling as the world's leading currency for debt nearly 20 years before the world officially acknowledged it. The new view of economic history proves that currency dominance does not require a 70-year transition period. It can happen in a flash. But here is the detail that matters for us today. The dollar didn't win simply because the US economy was bigger. Size is vanity. The dollar won because of financial depth. While London was relying on tradition, New York was building a superior plumbing system for capital. They created a market that was deeper, more liquid, and more ruthless in its efficiency. They didn't just grow the economy, they upgraded the operating system of money itself, and yet the illusion persisted. For 2 decades, the world continued to pretend the pound was king. This is the incumbent inertia. It is a psychological lag. London was still hosting garden parties. British diplomats were still giving lectures on global stability. The empire still boasted that the sun never set on its dominion. But in the quiet offices where the real decisions were made, the creditors had already switched languages. The world was borrowing in dollars, even while it tipped its hat to the pound. This is the dry irony of imperial decline. The facade is always the last thing to fall. A currency can lose its engine and still coast on momentum for a generation, fueled entirely by the denial of its users. The British elite believed they were still in charge because the statues were still standing. They didn't realize they were merely the caretakers of a museum. This leads us to the most unsettling realization of our investigation. If a currency can die fundamentally in the 1920s, but walk around like a zombie until the 1940s, where are we right now? We are looking at a system today that shows all the structural rot of London in the 1920s, yet it refuses to fall. Why? Because the Americans learned from the British. They realized that if you want to keep a zombie alive, you can't just rely on prestige. You need a mechanism. You need a way to turn your own massive debt into the very asset the world fights to own. They built a deficit machine, and it is the most brilliant trap ever designed. For you, debt is a chain. It dictates where you live, what you eat, and when you can retire. But for an empire, debt is not a liability. It is a product, and it is the most successful export the United States has ever created. You look at the national debt clock spinning out of control, and you feel anxiety. You wonder how the center can hold when the numbers defy gravity. But the architects of this system do not feel anxiety. They feel the satisfaction of a casino owner watching the chips circulate. Consider the architecture of the trap. It is a perfect circle. The world works hard to produce real things. Cars from Germany, electronics from China, oil from Saudi Arabia. They ship these tangible assets to American shores. In return, the United States sends back digital entries on a ledger. But here is where the trap closes. The exporters cannot simply stack these dollars in a vault. Inflation would eat them alive. They need a safe place to store them that pays interest. And where is the only market in the world deep enough, liquid enough, and safe enough to absorb trillions of dollars instantly? The US Treasury bond market. So the money flows right back to Washington. The United States gets the goods. The world gets the receipt. And then the world lends that money back to the United States so it can buy more goods. This is the modern version of exorbitant privilege. It allows the hegemon to set the interest rate on its own lifestyle. It forces foreign nations to fund the very military and economic power that competes with them. They are not buying American debt because they love America. They are buying it because they are trapped in a liquidity vacuum. There is simply no other bucket large enough to catch the rain. This is the dry irony that no economics textbook will say out loud. This is the only business model in the history of commerce where the customer pays with a handwritten IOU, and the merchant doesn't just accept it. He fights other merchants for the privilege of framing it and hanging it on his wall. We call this a deficit. The system calls it vendor financing on a planetary scale. However, this infinite loop relies on one critical bottleneck: the banking system. The world must go through the traditional rails to buy these bonds. But every debtor shares the same nightmare: the day the creditor finds a new technology that allows them to bypass the gatekeeper entirely. For decades, Washington thought it had the only keys to the vault. Then the internet created a backdoor. They saw the rise of crypto, stablecoins, and decentralized finance, not as a toy for geeks, but as a structural breach in the hull of the ship. So they didn't ban it. That would be crude. They did something much smarter. They decided to rewrite the code of the back door so that it leads exactly where the front door does. Enter the Genius Act. You think crypto is the rebellion? You think stablecoins are the exit strategy. Look closer. The enemy is wearing your armor. While you were watching the price charts waiting for the moon, the architects of the financial system were reading the code. They realized something that the zealots missed. You don't need to kill the technology if you can nationalize the liquidity. For years, the narrative was that digital currency would destroy the dollar. The reality, cemented by the Genius Act of 2025, is the exact opposite. The United States government decided to stop fighting the current and simply redirect the river. The Genius Act didn't ban stablecoins. It annexed them. It transformed the Wild West of unregulated tokens into a digital pillar of American hegemony. The rules are simple but devastatingly effective. To be a legal payment stablecoin, you must back your tokens one-to-one with high-quality liquid assets. And what is the definition of a high-quality liquid asset? Primarily, short-term US Treasury bills. Do you see the mechanism? Every time a teenager in Vietnam, a shopkeeper in Turkey, or a developer in Silicon Valley buys a stablecoin to escape their local inflation, they are now inadvertently buying US government debt. They are funding the deficit. The Act explicitly forbids these issuers from paying interest to you, the holder. You take the risk of holding the token. The issuer takes your real dollars and buys treasuries. This is exorbitant privilege 2.0. In the old world, the US had to convince foreign central banks to buy its debt. In the new world, they don't need to convince anyone. They just need you to use a smartphone. By enforcing these strict reserve requirements, Washington has turned the entire crypto ecosystem into a vacuum cleaner that sucks up global capital and funnels it directly into the US Treasury. They digitized the demand for the dollar. They bypassed the slow, clumsy SWIFT system in local banks, allowing the dollar to flow directly into the digital wallets of billions of people who previously couldn't access it. This is the dry irony of the digital age. The rebels built a technology to separate money from the state. The state took that technology, stripped out the ideology, kept the efficiency, and used it to extend the empire into cyberspace. The Wild West didn't end with a shootout. It ended when the sheriff realized he could make more money by taxing the saloon than by closing it down. The crypto-anarchists wanted a currency that couldn't be debased. What they got was a surveillance coin that funds the very machine they tried to dismantle. The fortress hasn't fallen. It just got a software update. So we have seen the history. We have seen the trap of specialization. We have seen the deficit machine. And now we see the digital cage being welded shut around us. This leaves us standing in a very strange place, a gray zone between a past that is rotting and a future that is rigged. We are living in the mixed equilibrium, and it is the most dangerous place to be. That nagging sense of unease you feel when checking your bank account or watching the headlines. It isn't paranoia, it is a quantifiable economic indicator. We have reached a stage in the cycle that theoretical models call a mixed monetary equilibrium. It is a state of limbo, where the old god is dying but the new one hasn't been born yet. In this environment, the fiat currency, the traditional medium of exchange, is suffering from a slow-motion collapse of trust. The probability that someone will accept it at its current value tomorrow is dropping, and the system is beginning to feel the friction again. But here's the catch. The alternatives, whether it is the ancient weight of gold or the digital math of crypto, are not yet deep enough or stable enough to handle the total volume of global civilization. We are stuck in the static between two radio stations. This creates a perverse set of incentives. When the medium of exchange becomes unreliable, people stop focusing on production and start focusing on survival through speculation. They move their capital from productive industries, things that actually make the world better, and hide it in assets they hope the system can't touch. This explains the erratic volatility of our era. In a mixed equilibrium, price doesn't reflect value anymore. It reflects the intensity of the exit queue. You aren't investing in Bitcoin because you have a deep passion for cryptographic hashes, and you aren't buying gold because you like the color of the metal. You are buying them because you are looking for a lifeboat on a ship where the captain is still insisting through a megaphone that the hull is perfectly intact. The irony is as dry as it is tragic. We call this market participation, but it is actually a form of defensive hoarding. We have turned the entire global economy into a casino, not because we want to gamble, but because holding safe cash has become the riskiest bet of all. This is the raw reality of 2026. The system is refusing to die, and the new world is struggling to be born. We are living in the friction. The silence you hear between the news cycles, that is the sound of the momentum running out.